In 2019, there was a lawsuit, a class action lawsuit of sellers in Missouri, and they claimed that there were antitrust and price fixing issues in how sellers paid buyers' agents in the process of home sales. The lawsuit named National Association of Realtors and most of the major brokerages as plaintiffs. The National Association of Realtors now has agreed to a settlement along with all of the brokerages except for Berkshire Hathaway, which actually owns a company that I work for, Long and Foster. So it's $500 million that the National Association of Realtors is going to pay, but more importantly and more interestingly, they agreed to a number of changes about how the structure would be done for buyers' agency commissions and how they would be paid. So let's take a look at what those changes are. So the typical practice across most of the United States is that when a seller lists a home, they pay commission, usually 2.5% or 3%, to the agent working for them, the seller's agent, and also offer a commission, 2.5% to 3% generally, for the agent who works with the buyer. Now, the resolution does not prevent that from continuing to go on. It's still the case that a seller could offer an incentive in the form of a commission in percentages like that to a buyer's agent. However, all the MLSs, which are the multiple listing services where real estate agents put the listings for other cooperating brokers to see, they will no longer be allowed to have a field that advertises that fact. So if there is a commission offered, it just can't be in the field there. So there's a lot of misinformation saying that, the sellers are no longer going to be able to pay a buyer's commission. That's not true. They can negotiate a buyer's commission still and offers a buyer's commission, but they can't list it in a designated field in the MLS. Okay, we should stop here before we get into the implications of this resolution because there's one very important thing that we need to discuss, and that's that until the early 1990s, there really wasn't such a thing as buyer's agency in real estate. It was actually created because up until then, it was understood through common law that any agents involved in the process had a fiduciary responsibility to the seller and to the seller alone. So buyers who were often younger, more naive, less sophisticated, had nobody representing their interest. And it was the National Association of Realtors and other realtor groups that began to establish and put into practice this idea of a seller offering a commission to both sides of the transaction paid at the settlement table so that buyers also would have some representation, even when they didn't necessarily have additional monies after the down payment and closing costs that they had to scrape together to find that sort of representation. So it was good intention. And one more issue that we should clear up before we jump into the implications is the idea that commissions were fixed. They never have been, or at least they shouldn't have been. Now, I can't claim in every situation with every agent and every MLS everywhere across the country that this was the case. There may have been bad actors out there. However, it's explained to you when you get a real estate license and by your brokerage and again throughout the course of working in this industry that you are allowed to negotiate any commission with the seller and the commission they want to offer to the buyer that they think is appropriate and you think is appropriate for your work and for them to best sell the property under the conditions they want at the amount that they want. So there was never, or there should never have been price fixing involved anywhere on the commission rates. So the number one implication that a lot of the press has said is that this should lead to reduction in home prices. And I'm not convinced. The reason is I think it's a basic of economics that what determines price is the amount of money that's chasing a given commodity. So I don't think this in any way makes it so that people, when they approach how much they're qualified for or how much they're willing to budget on a monthly basis and how much they're willing to put down on the purchase of a home, it doesn't change that at all. So they're still going to end up paying the same amount for things. But one thing that I do see happening is a lot of buyers having a lot less representation for their interest and having to do a lot more work on their own. Assume sellers in general stop offering any commission at all on the buyer's side. And there are buyers out there who can't afford to negotiate representation with a buyer's agent through a buyer's agency agreement of their own. They're going to go at it alone, which is going to be a little bit whack-a-mole in trying to find a house. Then I guess you bring in a lawyer to negotiate the house, but I don't think the lawyer will be particularly skilled at determining the correct price of the house or determining how to negotiate through things like the home inspection, which can become very, very sticky. So buyers, who are often more naive than sellers, are going to be at an even more dramatic disadvantage. One other implication that I don't think people have thought of. Part of the reason I think we see these settlements is because simultaneously the Department of Justice under President Biden was investigating the National Association, MLSs, and brokerages for antitrust on similar issues. So I think they were all trying to kind of kill two birds and make that go away as well here. Well, the implication with that is there might be motivation for brokerages to stop cooperating the way they do in the MLS. And the big implication on that is companies like Zillow or Redfin or Realtor.com. Do you know how they get their information? I go out, I get pictures that I pay a professional for, I write a description on the property, and I load it all into the MLS system. Then they belong to those MLS systems, and they put it out on the internet in order to get buyer leads that they then try to sell to agents. Well, they might be out of the loop, and there might not be a central place where people can go any longer to find homes, because there's really no reason necessarily for MLSs and the National Association of Realtors to maintain these sort of cooperative arrangements that I thought benefited everybody. With my next point, I worry a little bit about upsetting some people, ruffling some feathers, especially some really important clients of mine. But I think it's the truth, so I'm going to put it out there because that's always my policy. The other thing about this change is that it heavily, heavily favors sellers. And it even lends into the entire generational battle going on right now, kind of boomers versus millennials, that whole thing. With boomers, have done very well in the American real estate market and built up wealth in it over time. And now millennials trying to enter that market are having a really, really hard time. And this favors sellers. It basically has buyers either having to come up with additional cash out of their pockets in order to have full representation, or being in a spot where they don't have the representation that they should. So the rich get richer in this scenario. Sellers benefit a lot at the cost of buyers. And if there's anybody who's done really well, especially in the last few years in the real estate market, it's been the selling side. Coming up, the moral seems a little bit obscure. The lawsuits are one thing, but the DOJ chasing it is another. I feel like they were throwing spaghetti at the wall and trying to find a villain for very high prices. I don't think this will help with home prices, and it's going to put buyers at a big disadvantage with a lot less service. So we're in a market where, sellers have done very, very good and buyers have suffered. This contributes even further to that. And, it's kind of one of those things where you don't think about it until you know somebody who's affected. So, I know a lot of my clients now in the secondary home market have, kids who are trying to buy primary homes, and they're really, really struggling. And this will not make it any easier. So be careful before you blame all of us real estate agents as the villains here. I don't really think it's the case. I might do more on this, and if you want to talk about it, of course, John Burke of Burke & Company, Long and Foster Real Estate Group, always here to discuss things.